So it was in early 2017 that my buddy Felix and I jumped on an airplane in Virginia Beach and we flew to Stuttgart, Germany. And we were headed there to film a video to announce this new campus that my family and I were starting. And so we get there and everything's going great. And then nighttime came. And I remember that first night, I'd been asleep for a little while, and out of nowhere, I wake up in just sheer panic. I was sweating profusely, and I couldn't breathe, and there were these two sentences that just kept playing in my head over and over. The first one was, "What are you doing?" And the second one was almost like an answer to it. "You're ruining everything." Now, I don't know if it was an anxiety attack or what it was, but I remember, I know that I had never felt that way before, and honestly, I haven't felt that way since. But it really felt like the implications of this move had just descended upon me all at once. Like, what about all the stuff that you've built up in Virginia? And what about the kids going to German schools? Like, we don't even speak German, for crying out loud. What about leaving the friends that you've built up there? And what about leaving this church that you love and leaving the family that is there? And I remember out loud saying over and over in the middle of the night, "What are you doing?" Today's whole story devotional passage has a couple of those kind of freak out moments. We're in Matthew chapters 11 and 14. Now, the first person that we come to is John the Baptist. Do you remember him? He was the messenger of God, the one who would tell everyone about the Messiah, except that we find him in prison. Now, I can't imagine that this is how John really thought this was all going to play out. And I think that he has this freak out moment, because, to be able to go and tell someone about something, you have to be able to go. And John has this, what I'll call, moment of great doubt. And he has some friends take a message to Jesus. And we're in chapter 11, verses 2 and 3. And this is what he says. It says, "Now when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, 'Are you the one to come, or shall we look for another?'" Basically, he's asking, am I just wasting my breath telling people about you, that you're actually the Messiah? Have I given up everything under some false assumptions? The second freak out happens in chapter 14. Maybe you remember this story. So the disciples are on the edge of the shore, and there are thousands of people that have been following Jesus' boat while it was out on the water, and finally it comes into shore, and he starts teaching, and he starts healing people. But then it starts kind of rounding out towards the end of the day. The disciples start looking at each other and looking at their watches. Finally, one of them goes over to Jesus. He says, "Hey, look, so this has really been cool. But, the sun's going down. Nobody brought dinner. There's a lot of people here. We certainly can't feed them." And Jesus says, "No, you don't need to send them away. You feed them." Wait, like us? What are you talking about? It's not like we have a grocery store in our tunic or something. All we have is this little kid's lunch. And Jesus says, "Okay, then bring it to me." And it's this moment of truth for the disciples. And in both of these stories, we see that everything leads back to Jesus coming through, to Jesus being worthy of trust. You see, first, John the Baptist sends a message to Jesus asking, "Are you actually the Messiah, or should I be looking for someone else?" And this is what Jesus says to him. This is in verses 4 and 5 of chapter 11. It says, "And Jesus answered them, 'Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them.'" See, not only is he telling John what is actually going on, but he's also repeating these words that had been prophesied some 700 years before by the prophet Isaiah. You see, Jesus offers truth in this great moment of doubt. And then in chapter 14, the disciples are looking at Jesus like a deer in the headlights, and they're going, "We don't have any food." And so Jesus takes this kid's lunch and he starts dividing it and dividing it and dividing it. And then there's just a little bit left over, and he divides it. And then he divides it again. And he divides it again until there are 5,000 plus people not only had something to eat, but it says in Scripture that they ate until they were satisfied. But there's something cool about this story that honestly I hadn't really put together before. You see, it's not just that Jesus fed everyone out of nothing, which is cool, but he fed them enough. He fed them what they needed, not too much and not too little. And then, do you remember it says that the people ate until they were satisfied, and then there were 12 baskets left over. Do you remember how many disciples there were? There were 12. You see, Jesus provided exactly what was needed when it was needed. We see Jesus taking John's moment of great doubt and the disciples' moment of truth, and he turns these into moments of perfect provision. So I read these passages, and then I have to ask myself, what do I do when those moments come for me? What do you do when those moments come to you? These moments of great doubt and these moments of truth. The night of my great freak out, I remember being awake for quite a while until finally I realized that I was afraid. And I finally got to the place where I admitted I was afraid. I was afraid that, like John, maybe I had the signs wrong. And I was afraid, like the disciples, that maybe God wasn't able to come through. And I woke up the next morning, and Felix and I and some of our friends there, we got together and we started praying. And you know what? We just prayed for trust. And God gave it. And I've had to keep praying that prayer, saying, God, I believe. Help me with my unbelief. If you've been attending church for a little while, you may be familiar with this passage. It's Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30. And maybe it's exactly what we all need to hear today. It says this: "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Guys, I pray this Monday finds you under the yoke of Jesus Christ, our perfect provision. So Trinity Church, live this day trusting in the love of the Father, in the salvation of the Son, and in the power of the Holy Spirit. The Lord be with you.